Hello, my name is Dominic Underhallhouse and welcome to another episode of Moonbreaker. Today we're going to be doing something completely different, and what we're going to be looking at is some of the absolutely massive changes that are coming to Moonbreaker in the next few weeks. So there's been confirmation that they're looking at releasing a new patch update between sort of the end of October, early of November sort of time, and there's some fundamental changes coming to the game. Not only are the changes coming to some of the gameplay aspects, but also to some of the actual assists, the characters, and we've also got a few little updates from the AMA as to what things we might be expecting in the future. So I'm really excited to put this video together. There's a lot of things that I'm really quite interested in, so let's get stuck into it. So the first thing you may have heard is that this screen here is not going to look the same anymore. It's going to be one of the biggest changes to the gameplay of Moonbreaker so far. So what I've got here is this is the bridge. We've got your standard. We're going second. We've got 4 units to choose from, and that is just as you'd expect. Then you've got your reinforce button, 4 on the bridge, that sort of thing. So that's what we've grown to get used to. We've used to sort of building our lists with the idea of you need to draw a certain number of early drops, so you need to make a few more in your list to make sure that you can compete at the earlier turns. And that's what it's been so far. So the first thing we need to look at is this quote here from the AMA. Your roster is now 8 units down from 10, already a massive change. You start with all of those units at the game start. We remove reinforce, now you can plan, and it feels awesome. So this is a direct quote from Charlie Cleveland of Unknown Worlds. He's the lead on this project, and it is a really, really exciting change. Now, there's a lot of things that people are concerned about. There's a lot of things that people are a little bit worried about as to how much it's going to change the game. I was one of these people, and the more conversations I've had in Discord and conversations, in fact, Charlie has come into the Discord himself. We've had some really, really insightful conversations about it, and I'm no longer as worried as I used to be. So it's changing the game from what would probably be the perfect game for me, but it's making it a better game for the player base in general, and I'm all for it. So the first thing to bear in mind, remove reinforce. So as you can see at the top left, we've got the reinforce button here. This is now gone. It's no longer going to exist. Reinforce is not a mechanic in the game as it stands in the new version. So what that means is that you now have more options on what you spend your Cinder on. So spending your Cinder is going to be really, really important every turn anyway. We already know this. We already sort of build around it and you have to adapt to it. But you no longer have to worry about, do you need to keep 3 Cinder to reinforce? When do you do so? You've got access to your whole roster, so you just need to make the best decisions possible. So a lot of people have discussed, does this make aggro lists incredibly powerful? And the answer is yes, but you can deal with it. So, for instance, one of the things that people pointed out is that things like Maximus turn 1, Rickety Backfire turn 2 can happen every single game. And that's terrifying. If you're coming against the ideal 1 drop, the ideal 2 drop every single game, you're in a lot of trouble. But there's now means and ways to sort of deal with that. So, Beatrice Enforcer, for example. Your opponent plays Maximus turn 1 every game. That's fine. You play Beatrice Enforcer turn 2 every game. You've still got that 1 extra Cinder Bank that you didn't use on turn 1. They play Rickety Backfire. Maximus can't really do much into Beatrice. They get maybe 1 turn of attacking your captain. And then your following turn, you play Taurian Guardian. Now, one of the interesting things about Taurian Guardian is that in this situation, it actually has impact immediately. You place it next to Beatrice, and not only is Maximus almost incapable of damaging Beatrice, with things like crits being the only option, but even Rickety Backfire has a chance of now missing and damaging himself. So as much as there is a lot of concern about aggro curve outs and things like that, you can build your list knowing that that might be an opportunity. It might be a sort of something that's coming, and how to deal with that. And one of the things that I'm quite excited about is the inclusion of silver bullet units. So I've put 3 of these here. Florio Lancer being the first one. Now, Florio Lancer is a good unit. He's in a lot of different lists. It's a very powerful model, but to bear in mind is that a lot of lists may have other things they want to be spending their Cinder on. They might want to be playing more bodies to the board and that sort of thing. But if you find yourself in a situation where you got the Vortex assist, you found them backed into a corner and you're just struggling to break through their wall and get that extra damage done. If you're playing a list that spends its Cinder every turn, take a break, play Florio, and then from that point onwards, you've got that extra push, that extra sort of longevity to it. I quite like the idea of Florio Lancer as sort of a finisher option in an aggro list. The reason being, you've got 8 units in your roster. you're not likely to use all 8 units every game. You're really not. So having a few different options as to ways to finish the game. Florian Lancer, if your opponent's getting low on health, you can push damage through without needing to be anywhere near them whatsoever. On the other side of things, if you're being pushed damage through, if your opponent has sort of gone all in on their, right, we just need to kill the captain plan, you can put a Toner Mystic Manteo in your roster without having to actually worry too much about it taking up a deck building slot. You've got 7 other slots to fill it with what you need, and it's just a really powerful silver bullet. You can put it in there specifically for that matchup, and it doesn't impact your other games. You've got the ability to just play what you need to as a defensive strategy against it. Now, obviously, you can't go running 3, 4, 5 silver bullet sort of models in each list, because then you don't have enough for your own proactive game plan. But it's a really useful option as well. And then lastly, we've got Necker Hall. So if your opponent's playing things that poke characters down and things like that, or if you've got immobile units, things like that, you can use Necker Hall to reposition them, to move them around, to sort of start getting that positional advantage and start getting that late game advantage. And it's another tool that, if your opponent's trying to grind down your units, you don't always have a defensive mechanism against that. You might not be running Stitch and Whip Patchy, you might have been dead, you might not have the right assists for that. But you can run a one of Necker Hall as an option to potentially sort of bring in that matchup. And I can see this sort of list building becoming a lot more common in future. And I'll be honest, I'm really looking forward to it. One of the other things people mentioned was the idea of the games becoming stale if everyone's playing the same few starts. I was absolutely on that boat. I thought exactly that. It is now gone from my thought process completely because I've been convinced by, again, people in the Discord, once a new set releases, there is so much more, like exponential increase in options every single time a new set releases. So it may be, I wouldn't say stale, but maybe a little bit less varied initially until we get the new units, the new captain, that sort of thing. But the longer the game exists, the less and less that's going to be an issue. So overall, I'm really excited for the change. I was very hesitant to begin with. I was one of the voices in the Discord saying, I don't think this is good for the game. I'm worried about how this is going to go. Is it going to take away from the problem-solving aspect if you get the exact unit you want every time? But there's so many variables in Moonbreaker that I actually think this is going to be a really positive change now. I have been talked around. I have had my mind changed. If anyone wants to discuss that with me, get hold of me. I am happy to sort of go back and forward, discuss your points of view. I have been convinced that that is a brilliant change. Now, one of the things to bear in mind is that with Reinforce being gone, that changes some things in the existing game already, and one of those being Astra. So Astra is something that's been talked about as a bit of a problem, but with Reinforce being gone, her passive now is going to do absolutely nothing. But to change all that, don't worry, Unknown World to here with an entire Astra rework. So here is the new Astra. These were posted in the Discord. It was posted by the dev team, and so these are, official from the devs. These aren't fan-made or anything like that. Obviously, anything in this whole video is not guaranteed to happen. Things can change. Things might have different artwork, different abilities. Some things might be scrapped altogether. But this is what the sort of the work in progress is so far. So the changes with Astra so far. Her passive is changed completely. It's no longer when she kills a unit, reinforce. It's when she destroys a crew, refresh her move. So this is, I think, a lot more in tune with sort of Astra's playstyle. The reinforcing was terrifying, absolutely terrifying, because it was just free unit advantage in a captain's list that already got mana advantage, and that became overwhelming quite quickly. So Astra had everything. It was unit advantage, mana, so Cinder advantage, and also the ability to remove stun from units. On top of that meant that you just got you found your combo quickly, you made it cheap, and then you played it cheap and activate it straight away, which some games did start to feel oppressive. So the first thing it's going to change here is the what used to be Boost Morale is now going to be Grow Cinder. Now this is a really fun, really interesting change here. So as you can see here, Grow Cinder says create Cinder Sphere maximum of 3 for 1 Cinder. So with Cinder Sphere we've got right next to it. Absorb Cinder. Captain or crew that touch Cinder Sphere gain 1 Cinder, then destroy it. And it's also got Absorb Light, so every turn increase the Cinder in the Cinder Sphere by 1 up to a maximum of 3. So if you play this turn 1, you could go collect it straight away, but you've netted nothing. You've gained no Cinder whatsoever. The following turn, you gain 2. At that point, it functions almost exactly the same as Into the Breach did. However, it does have that 1 turn delay as well. And then on a third turn, it's an even bigger boost. Sorry, not Into the Breach, Boost Morale. It's an even bigger boost than Boost Morale was. However, you're 2 turns delayed. So it's got more powerful options. It also has more conditions to it as well. The other thing that has been confirmed about this, which is not necessarily written anywhere, is it's any captain or crew. You can take your opponent's Cinder and steal it for yourself. It's a huge, huge swing if you do so. So I can imagine people playing Crankbait, because for 1 Cinder, you steal their Cinder, and not only does that deny them 1, you gain the Cinder back that you'd have used for the grappling hook. If you can do it later on, you can take 3 Cinder from them. If you can put yourself in a position where you can use movement tools, stuns, immobilizing to stop them getting to their Cinder, there's a huge amount of counterplay to that, and it makes almost like a mini objective-based game before we even consider whether real objectives come in as well. So there's a huge, huge change to Astra coming. I'm really looking forward to this, and the next part of it is Into the Breach. So Into the Breach is the ability that we know and love, but it has been changed, and this is still under development, it's still in discussion. There was even a conversation about it when it was shown, saying, is this right, do we need to change it? And that is removing stun from all touching units. So one of the things that's brought up in the Discord is this combination right here. Rickety Backfire, Taria Arsenal, Into the Breach, and at the moment, it's going to be 8 total Cinder. So, 2 for Rickety, 2 for Taria, 2 for Into the Breach, and 2 for Taria Arsenal's ability on Rickety Backfire. The thing with this combo is, if Rickety Backfire's passive triggers twice, which, it's not impossible, I can't remember the exact stats, I know it's 70% for each activation, so it's reasonably likely you could activate 2, then from nothing on the board, you can go from nothing whatsoever to dealing 12 damage with Rickety Backfire, another 2 with Taria Arsenal, and then obviously still the 1 with Astra as well. So that is a huge, huge chunk of damage that can come out of nowhere. It's 15 damage from having 1 on the board to 15 in a turn, and it costs 8 Cinder to do so. And that's because Into the Breach removes stun from all touching units. Now, this can potentially be okay, because we don't know how big of a deal the touching Astra is going to be. So, for instance, if you put the opponent's Astra in a position where they can't place more than 1 model there, or if you immobilize her and put her in a difficult spot, that could be a limiting factor in itself. And also, the Cinder Spheres again are going to be really impactful on this, because maybe they can use the Cinder Spheres earlier. Maybe they can actually do this combo quicker than turn 5, just storing up all their Cinder, and they can have that little bit extra coming around, and it's just a large burst of damage out of nowhere. So this is something that is still being discussed. There was a discussion about, do you find a way to cancel it, removing stunned, because other things stun, like the assist, like Peacemaker Balam, they also stun, so do those effects need to be changed by it? Should it just give things charge? Should it only affect 1 unit? Should it be the next unit cast that was played in base contact with Astra? Lots of things still being discussed, but this is how it stands at the moment, and honestly, I think it's actually quite a fun change. I don't know where the balance implications are going to be, but I'm really keen to find out. So that is a huge, huge rework on Astra. I think it should bring her in line with the other captains. It may not do, but I personally think the play around of the Cinder Spheres is going to be the biggest part here. So Astra's ability to just generate free Cinder every turn was huge, but if they're having to play further and further back to protect those Cinder Spheres, you're not going to see the same aggressive list necessarily, because Astra can't move up herself with all of her units and still protect the Cinder Spheres. You might have a fast unit to get around the side, like you said, a Crankbait or a Vortex. Anything of stealing those Cinder Spheres from your opponent means that Astra is more sort of pigeonholed into a defensive style than offensive. Aggro Astra might just be taking a few steps down. It will still probably be good because it's free Cinders, cheap units, guaranteed roster now, but it might be taking a peg down or 2. So the next thing to look at here is the ship assists. We've got changes coming to a few different assists, and these are also absolutely huge. The first of which we're going to look at is Orbital Strike. So we don't know anything about the radius on this, but we can already see that the cooldown has been reduced. So, and this is now, instead of previously where it was just deal a big AoE in an area, hit every unit, and deal 3 damage to all of them, it is now 3 damage to all units in an area at the start of your next turn. So this is in tune with a lot of other games have similar effects like this. Like I know Warhammer 40,000 has things like this where you place a marker on the battlefield, and if your opponent doesn't get out of range, something bad is going to happen. So this is going to become probably stronger if objective play does get released. It's something that, a lot of people have asked for. Being able to place this on an objective and say, that's fine, you can have the objective, but if you sit there, your whole team takes 3 damage. Every 3 turns, that's a really, really interesting set of decisions to make. Are you willing to take that damage to hold that point? In things like the Astra matchups, if your opponent is wanting to get to their Astra Cinder Orbs, you can place an Orbital Strike on top of it now. When that happens, you can place that down and say, you have to lose 3 life if you want to get your Cinder. And most people will take that opportunity, but if you're rushing them down, that's going to be a huge difference. And again, it's no longer more of a damage tool, it's more of a utility, move them out. Even in the current situation, if someone's trying to hole up in a corner, they've got some stationary units, they're trying to sit back with Florio Lancer behind a Beatrice, Notorian Guardian, or like a Defense Dome and that sort of thing. Defense Dome obviously mitigates it, but it forces people to sit in one area. So if you can basically say, you're sure you can sit there, but you're all taking 2 damage, that's a really big change. I'm interested to see how this plays out. It should be quite an interesting change. The next we've got is Plink. This is a divisive skill in itself. People have been either very happy with Plink or very upset with it. A lot of people think it's perfectly balanced, a lot of people think it's incredibly imbalanced. So Plink is changing most likely, and what we've got here is a really, really clever way of implementing it. So we've got choose a unit whose health changed this turn. If friendly, restore 1 health, if enemy, deal 1 damage. This doesn't sound like too big of a deal, but it means that you can't just start plinking things from turn 1 if they're out of line of sight. You can't just be, guaranteeing you have that clock every turn. You still have to put the effort in to go out and damage your opponent. You can't just get into a stalled ball state and whoever has Plink wins. That doesn't happen anymore. So it's going to be a really interesting approach. Also, healing with it is much, much harder now. So you have to either have healed your own unit or found a way on your own turn to take damage in order to be able to heal with Plink. So Plink is less of a defensive tool, more of an offensive one. You're going to need to be aggressive to get use out of Plink. Some of the interesting synergies of this are things like Savria Safeguard. So if you place Savria Safeguard's ability onto an ally, it will say, the next damage they take is reduced to 0. Well, Plink, you can't choose that target anymore. You can't just say, I'm going to Plink them to remove the Savria Safeguard shield, because they haven't had their health change that turn. So that shield is going to persist until something else, a real attack, has to take that shield off, and then you can not even necessarily Plink afterwards because it might not have actually dealt any damage. The same for Extilior shields. So Extilior's Shield of Hope is basically just got a shadow buff because you can't Plink that shield off anymore. It doesn't work because the unit hasn't changed their life total. So you have to use something else to take that off, and then if you deal enough damage to still damage Extilior, sure, you can then Plink, or the unit that it's protecting. But that's a really big functional change. Things are going to stop being able to just Plink things consistently and just use that as their clock while stalling the game out. So huge change to Plink. I'm here for it. I really like it. I think it's going to change the pace of games. It's going to stop things feeling as inevitable from the early turns. If you're trying to play a defensive slowdown deck and you know that your opponent's just dealing 1 damage every turn, it feels a bit like you're going to start losing the game. This is a really interesting way to work around it. Next up, we're looking at Cinder Infusion. So this one I think has been changed based on power level alone. It was really, really powerful to get 2 additional Cinder and some health back on your captain. So that is a really interesting thing that we're looking at changing. Also, they're looking at changing. This one, give target allied crew infused for 3 turns. So it's crew specific, which is important here. And what infused is you gain a Cinder every turn for 3 turns. So now Cinder Infusion has got the same cooldown, but instead of 2 Cinder in a burst, it's a Cinder every turn for 3 turns. One thing that this does stop is it stops you on turn 3 just playing, a huge thing and then using Astra to Into the Breach it. You can't do that anymore because you can't play your Macquarie Thicket and Into the Breach it or whatever, or switch back into the Breach, because you need to place Cinder Infusion onto a unit. So it gives you that. It gives you that sort of a restriction to it. And on top of that as well, if you have to place it on an early unit, which you're going to want to do if you want to play this early, if that unit dies, you don't have your infused anymore. So if someone plays a Maximus and you just find a way to take that Maximus out and they've just spent their Cinder Infusion on it, their assist hasn't done anything. It'll give them that one send at that turn, but then that's it. So Cinder Infusion, still very powerful. I mean, a lot of the time you're going to be able to play it on a unit, on a crew, keep them safe, and just gain free value. But it has got more counterplay now. It doesn't heal your captain anymore, which I think is a good choice because, again, I'm not a big fan of things getting multiple advantages from the same thing unless it's very, very carefully thought out. And so gaining health and Cinder is a huge advantage because it skews it towards the defensive decks wanting that, so you can just an aggressive deck not only is going to be playing smaller units, you suddenly get to play a bigger one and you've undone some of their damage. So I think this is a great change. It's a really interesting one. I'm looking forward to seeing it as well. And next, finally, we are onto my favourite new assist. I can't wait to use this. We've got Stowaway. So Reinforce is gone, as we know, but Stowaway still remains. And Stowaway, what it does now, is the same cooldown, and I think this is the one I'm going to be using probably every time I get my hands on it. It's exactly the sort of mechanic that I love. I've got change your lowest cost undeployed crew to a new one that costs one more. So this is absolutely massive. So it's not necessarily going to be the most powerful one in the game. It's probably not even going to be close, but it's got so much potential for you making the right decisions in the game. I can't wait to use it. So, for instance, if you play a game and you're playing, a reasonable sort of like aggressive strategy, say you have a couple of 1-drops in your list, and you realise that you play one on your first turn, you play a 2-drop on your second turn, and you start to realise there that your opponent is actually on a defensive list. They're going to hold you back for quite a long time. You're not going to have that 1-drop, say Drum Dancer or something like that. It's not going to make that huge impact that you want it to. Every 2 turns, you Stowaway, Drum Dancer, say, becomes Fate Twister Tanton. It becomes a Beatrice. Something that it's not necessarily great, but it's something you can use because that's the lowest cost unit in your bridge. And then say that you've carried on curving out from there. A couple of turns later, it's still the lowest cost unit. Use it again. Change it to a 3-drop. You might get Axel Pyro, something like that. It changes how you can play because if you can keep units that you don't need to use, it incentivizes you to keep changing them to more and more expensive units. Over the course of a game, the more expensive units are probably the ones that have the bigger impact. So if you don't need to cast your cheap ones early, stalling until you cast your big ones allows you to just get that one extra big unit. You don't necessarily get to choose what it is. It might be one that doesn't match your game plan, but usually a 4-drop is more powerful than a 1-drop, and if you can do that over the course of the game, that's a really big advantage. I can't wait to try this out. I'm really keen to look at it. A couple of things that in its current iteration, the way that the selection is made, there's a couple of tiebreakers. So first of all, it's the cheapest cost unit, and to clarify, the unit stays in your hand, and as far as we know, its cost will change as well as the unit. So a 1-drop will fully just not exist, and it will be a 2-drop that has stowed away in your bridge. So cheapest cost is the first distinguishing factor there, differentiator. The second one is on attack, so then it'll be whichever has the lowest attack. If you have 2 1-drops, they both have one cost. You need to find a way to choose between them, which is going to be stowed away. And if one has 2 attack, one has 1 attack, it's the 1 attack one that will then get upgraded. And then after that, it's the amount of health as well. So the one with the lowest health will get upgraded. So that's a way of sort of breaking ties. I can't wait to use this. I want to turn a Maximus into a Maquani Thicket. I'm going to be trying to do that, absolutely. I think this has got really good play, especially in slower control-based games, because you don't need your trading units early on. I'm really excited for this. Hopefully you are too, and I'd love to hear whether you think it's going to be fantastic or whether you think it's going to be terrible. Either way, I'm going to really enjoy playing it. And here we have just a few of the quotes from the AMA. So I've taken just a few of the things that I found to be some of the interesting takeaways from this, and some of the things that we can expect to see people working on in the future. None of these have got dates. None of these are guaranteed. This is all just things that the devs have said throughout the AMA, and this is things that I think we should keep an eye out for. Daily and weekly quests are something they want to do, and they just haven't gotten to them yet. This is for things like the season track, and you're finding a way to speed up that process. Excellent. They're not sure how they could award players for painting. They'd love to do it, but can't figure out how they do it at the moment. And this isn't for lack of ideas. I'd just like to clarify that. I have seen myself probably 15 to 20 fairly reasonable ideas as to how to encourage people to paint and giving an XP reward. I've not seen one yet that's been flawless. I've seen a lot of them that have been fairly abusable, as in just go into painting, leave it open for hours, or go into painting and then just splash a couple of units, call it a day, get an XP bonus. I think it needs to be quite well figured out, so I can completely understand why they haven't got a system in place for that. I agree that it's something that would be nice to do. I'm not sure if it's going to be practical. Also, they want to make sure they don't have a stale meta, and they're hoping they can do this through other methods instead of randomizing the assists. So the way that I interpret this is that eventually we may be able to pick assists. We may be able to, either have them random or semi-random, but that may be as it is now, but we might be able to just actually pick our own assists, and that changes list building hugely. If you can guarantee that you've got the right assists, if you want to build, say, a Zax list with Florio Lancer, Detonia, the Flechette Launcher, you can then guarantee you've got Vortex and Orbital or Vortex Corrosive every single time. That would be a huge change. So it's something that they're considering. Again, not guaranteed. I quite like there being some random aspect. My personal preference would be you pick one assist, and then at the start of the game, both you and your opponent pick from a pool of the same assists as to what their second one's going to be, and then just keep them hidden until someone uses them, just like the current system. I like that. But there's obviously loads of other options as well. And here we go on to the Season Pass. They don't want it to feel unobtainable. We're making adjustments to this in our next patch, and we'll continue to tweak it to make it feel good. Now, the most important thing for this, for me, is to make it feel good. The devs are listening. They want people to enjoy this game. And, there was some discussion about how many hours they were expecting people to need to do. It was actually a consensus among the devs as to what was a reasonable number. It's just turned out that, that hasn't balanced with the player expectation. But with the goal here to make it feel good, I feel much better about it. It's not here to, to make it a challenge. It's not here to keep people playing. It's to make it feel good. And I really think the key thing about Moonbreaker is that that's where the devs continue to put their focus on making it feel good. Next up, we're looking to create a paint job training post so players can upload and download paint jobs. Got some other things to do first. Again, I think this will be hard to implement. I think this is going to be something that if you make it so that everyone can just buy and sell each other or trade each other's paint jobs, that's going to de-incentivize painting for those who don't really want to do it. But if you put, say, a blank cost alongside it, something that it's not free to do so. You can use another player's painting, use their skill, and you can just pay a blank amount to them. I think that would work well. I think that's something that's really an interesting system because there's some incredibly talented artists making beautiful models. If you're in the Discord, they're coming up constantly. There's a few people as well that are making them all the time. I would love to be able to use some of their paint jobs. I'm still going to want to do some of my own as well, but they can do it far better than I can. So finding a way to give them that recognition, I think would be perfect. Next, the campaign wasn't working after over a year of work, but 2v2, both in multiplayer and against the AI, is very high on the list. So the campaign, there's been a lot of discussion about it. I'm not going to go into too much depth, but essentially what I've seen previously said that they were hoping to sort of try and make a campaign at one point, but the gameplay felt like it was getting in the way of the story, and the story felt like it was interrupting the gameplay. So because the story is being developed with some incredibly talented writers, and it's got a lot of world building like Brandon Sanderson, delivering it in small chunks throughout a campaign mode, it didn't feel organic. It felt a bit sort of like both modes were taking away from each other, is my understanding of it. So that's why the audio drama route has worked out really well, because you can actually get big chunks of narrative, you get that vocalization, you get that really interesting sort of voice acting style of things, and it doesn't feel like you're being forced to stop the game to listen to it. You can do it while painting and that sort of thing. And also, if you want to do that, it doesn't feel like you stop listening to that to play the game. So that's why the campaign isn't really something that they're looking at the moment. 2v2 in multiplayer and against the AI, that sounds really fun to me. I'm not sure how it would work, as if each player gets a separate turn, or you alternate moving models, or because can two people do things at once? It just depends who acts quick enough on the same team. Loads of things to work out there, but if they're working on it, I trust them. Sounds like a lot of fun. Monthly patches. Next one is going to include a brand new map. That was the bit I wanted to highlight here, but brand new map is good. We've seen pictures of some Cholek ones in the trailers and things like that, which look good. But also they're working on a ton of new units for the next season update. It looks like it's going to be January. And so having a month is quite nice to know that as well. But we have units in the works all the way up to Season 6 in various stages of development, and we'll bring them as fast as we can. So, knowing that there's that much investment in it, given that they're 4-month seasons, that's 2 years worth of models that they're currently working on at the moment. And given there's 25 models in each one, we're looking at 200 crew currently in design, as well as an additional 8 captains. There's a huge amount of things to come. So this is making me really, really excited. I'm absolutely over the moon to hear that. It may just seem like a little thing, but knowing that there's that longevity planned is really, really encouraging to me. Planning on adding more cargo run bosses and relics as we go, and it'll make that mode explode with possibilities. Again, cargo run is just fun, but the more variety, the better. It's supposed to be a bit wacky, a bit, every time you go, you want something different to happen. You don't want just like one correct route. The more relics, the more bosses. Even potentially someone suggested, this isn't a dev suggestion, this is just a player suggestion, having different routes you could pick to go towards different bosses gives that mode a lot more variety as well. And then lastly, they definitely want to do rank play. No specific plans yet, but it's absolutely something they're researching, working towards. I can't wait for rank play. Looking forward to it. I think that will be great fun. Overall, I'm really, really excited. I think this has been one of the most exciting times in terms of news for the game, even more exciting than the release, because this is absolutely making it clear that the devs are listening to feedback, they're making changes, the problematic assists are being changed, the problematic characters being changed, there's multiple modes being investigated that people want. There's so many things that are being listened to, and changes are happening quicker than I think we even have any right to expect. So for anyone that was dubious about whether the devs are going to listen, whether it's going to change into a route that we don't want it to, hopefully this will reassure you. I'm so excited about the future of Moonbreaker. I hope you are too. I want to thank everyone for watching. If you've got any comments, I'm sure there's going to be loads of things people want to hear about this. So make sure you drop something in the comments. Let me know what you think. Share this with anyone you think has a discussion, and it's going to change people's opinion of the game. So make sure you comment, like, subscribe. It really does make my day. Thank you very, very much for watching, and otherwise, just have a good day.